Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us again for this conversation with Dr. Matt Lee, the Director of Empirical Research at the Human Flourishing Programme at Harvard University. I couldn't be happier to talk to Matt again for part 2 on love, leadership, and flourishing. Matt, it is such a joy to be with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Katie. Always wonderful to talk about these related topics and especially to talk with you.
Oh, thank you so much. So Matt, we were thinking it would be wonderful actually to hear, how did you get to where you are today?
So I'll try to be brief. It reminds me of this idea that a person becomes a person through other persons. And so I think that any accomplishment is collective, and it goes back to leadership. And I'd like to tell a story about when I was considering what to do after graduating from college. And I had kind of a working class focus of get a career with a pension and health benefits and all the rest. And I wasn't thinking much beyond that. And I had applied to a program to get a master's degree related to criminal justice. I was working at a juvenile detention center at the time. And the two faculty that I spoke with spent some time with me, heard what I was interested in, and basically said, you should not be part of our program. You should not be on the life path that you are on. And, when I look back on this, it was really a nice illustration of the difference between leadership and administration. From an administrative standpoint, get another paying customer in the door, another student in the chair, another graduate that we can report. But they were really looking out for what was best in the long run, not just for me, but for society. I would have been terrible in the role that I was training for. And they knew it, and I didn't know it. And so they very graciously decided to take a loss on this and to encourage me to pursue a doctoral degree in sociology. And that was very different than what I had been expecting. And I said, well, the reason I want to come to this program is because I can afford it. I can work full time during the week and go on Saturday and Sunday. It was a weekend program. And they said, well, if you go to a doctoral program, they will give you a stipend. And I said, what is that? And then I said, well, okay, so they'll give me some money, but I still have to pay the tuition. No, they give you tuition remission. What is that? So I just had no idea. And they saw it as their responsibility to look out for my well-being, look out for my, deeper flourishing, rather than just kind of taking the quick path to a career that would have been unsatisfying. And I would have been bad in that role, and I wouldn't have helped others nearly as much. So I think they were quite right about that. And I think that that's, really at the heart of leadership, is recognizing the potential in individuals and in groups and in systems, and figuring out ways through your influence, through your ability to influence individuals, groups, and systems to promote more flourishing. And so they did that so marvelously. And I was just thinking back to, teachers or family members or friends who approached my relationship with them with my best interest at stake. And I'm thinking about this second grade teacher who integrated the creative arts into the reading, writing, and arithmetic kind of content. And most of the other teachers didn't do that, but there was this sense that she cared about every individual in the classroom, not just about their ability to read and write, and she saw that as important, but their ability to flourish and their ability to be whole human beings. And so I can kind of look back on my story and find these examples of influential leaders who were not just administering some set of requirements that had been handed to them. And I've got nothing against administration. I was an administrator myself. I think it's important when you have goals that are set to meet them efficiently. So it's not that that's wrong or anything. It's just that there are times in life where you have to ask the question, what is going to serve the flourishing of this person and the larger group and the planet that we live on? And maybe just meeting this goal is not it. So I think that's, that sort of explains how I've been able to land in these, pretty amazing roles that I look back and I think, well, how did someone like me end up there? That doesn't seem quite fair. Somebody else probably is more deserving or better or something like that. But, it's because people that I would consider leaders, and again, they could be friends, they could be family members, they don't have to hold a formal title in an organization. They saw some potential and they were looking past the immediate circumstances or looking past the narrow goals and narrow understandings of efficiency. And they would say, well, there's something, possible here and something that could be cultivated that could be even better. And I think that, the leaders that have inspired me have always been people who, first of all, led with love. They actually care about the flourishing of other people and not just their own advancement of their own agendas. But they also can sort of love forth the good in other people. So they see what is potential there, maybe something that other people don't see, or they don't see it as clearly, and they can imagine a pathway to make that real. And so there's some imagination involved here. There's some skill and wisdom and creativity and all the rest, intellectual virtues, all of that. But I think more than anything, there's just that primary commitment to the good of every individual that you encounter. And when people have treated me that way, they bring out the best in me. And then I want to do the same for others. And so, wherever life has taken me, the doors have been opened by people who saw potential and wanted that potential to be nurtured and wanted to be part of that. And that's a nice definition of leadership. I mean, there's many definitions, but, I think, that recognition that everyone has something to offer, and it's just a matter of figuring out what that is and what the best circumstance for them might be. Not everybody's right for every role. And so we do need, as these two faculty members did, we need to steer people away from the wrong role, even if it means some kind of shortfall on our spreadsheet. We're trying to tally up the numbers and get it to look right. That's not the most important thing. And that doesn't really, in the long run, serve anybody very well. But it is possible for us to have kind of higher values and have a separate spreadsheet with the higher values. And sometimes the one that we're working from reflects that, and sometimes it doesn't. And the leader says, I'm going to go with the higher values.
Oh, Matt, that's brilliant. I love that idea of the kind of higher values, and the leader actually going with the higher values, and the idea that, everyone has so much potential. It's just like figuring out where best you can serve them and they can serve society and, enable flourishing themselves. So once they've been enabled to flourish, where can they start contributing to society? I think it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much wisdom in that. And Matt, what are you learning, would you say, at the moment about love and flourishing and leadership?
Well, it's one of these topics, as the cliche goes, the more that you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know. And so the topic just keeps expanding. The horizon keeps expanding. And so, I wanted to share a brief quote from this book called Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption by Bryan Stevenson. And I've used this book the last few years in my course at Harvard. I teach in the sociology department, and the students just love it. And of course, there's a kind of fictionalized account of Bryan Stevenson's life that's been turned into a movie, which I haven't seen, so I can't vouch for the movie. But the book is just amazing. And so this is in my copy. This is on page 14, and this really gets to the essence, I think. And I'm increasingly talking in terms of essences, which I know is forbidden in many social science and humanities disciplines, but I'm picking this up again. And that maybe is a third installment of our conversation about essences. But Brian says, the distance that I experienced in my first year of law school, he was at Harvard, made me feel lost. So his experience at Harvard was initially one of distance and feeling lost, feeling alienated, feeling disconnected. And then he says, because he was working for a legal clinic that dealt with clients who were on death row in many cases, sentenced to death in the United States. I know not all countries have this, so death row might not make any sense, but you can be sentenced to death in the United States. They will execute you. He says in the next sentence, proximity to the condemned, to people unfairly judged. That was what guided me back to something that felt like home. And so I see a lot of resonance here with the life of Jesus, who spent a lot of time in proximity with the condemned and was condemned himself. And so when I think about leaders, there's a story of a president of an airline who on Thanksgiving went to load baggage, onto the planes, just to say, just because I'm president doesn't mean that I don't work on holidays. Like, you have to do something that I wouldn't do or whatever. There's a kind of, I would say it this way. It's not a willingness to be with the condemned. It's this sense that you have no choice but to be present with those who are suffering, those who are marginalized, because we're all suffering and we're all marginalized, and we might just cover it up better, sometimes more so than others. But our liberation is bound up in the liberation of everyone else. And so, by spending time outside of the Harvard Law School classroom with folks who had been sentenced to be executed in the United States, Brian Stevenson connected with a deeper sense of what life was all about. And that, sort of helped him on his journey. Now he's a very famous leader, and he's created, not only has he argued in front of the US Supreme Court successfully and done so much good, but he's also created a monument and a museum to raise consciousness about the legacy of slavery and lynching in the United States in a way that was not happening before. So he's almost part of a process now of creating mythical truths that transcend any particular group. And to me, that's really a nice reflection of leadership. Again, I'm doing my work with my client. I'm a lawyer. This person's on death row. I'm doing that work at the individual level, and there's a deep relationship there. But I'm also relating to deeper truths that can be expressed collectively, through the creation of this museum and this monument. So, you look sometimes at people who you think, well, how do they do all of that? It's because they inspire others to help. No one person can build a museum. But, when you hear, and I'll read it again because I think it's worth reading. He says, the distance I experienced in my first year in law school made me feel lost. Well, right there, I'm with him, because I felt lost and I felt distance. And so I want to know, like, how do you turn that around? And then he says, proximity to the condemned. And I say, wow, okay. That seems like not the textbook answer that I'm getting in some of my classes that are making me feel so lost, but that seems like the real hidden wisdom. And I want to learn more. So I want to work with you or someone like you. And so that's really how leaders get things done, is that they load the baggage on Thanksgiving. Again, not everyone has Thanksgiving as a holiday. So it's a holiday in November in the United States. So rather than having the day off to relax, you're down there loading the baggage. And, it's not just a gimmick. Of course, you don't want the president of the organization loading the planes every day, because then the work of the president wouldn't get done. But it does suggest that there's a kind of solidarity that doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy or what your status is or what my job title is, but we're all part of the same team, or even better, family. And there are actually people who live like that, and they're very influential leaders because people want to work with them and to become part of initiatives that they're building because they're energizing. And so everybody can do more because everyone is so energized. And of course, there's always blind spots and shadow sides, and everyone's human. So we don't want to make too much of this, but it is possible for one person to be in the kind of relationship with others that leads to great things being done and flourishing along the way for everyone who's involved. And so it's not just working ourselves to death for the external cause so that someday someone can experience flourishing. It's about how do we experience flourishing in this moment, doing this work in these relationships with all of the troubles that you find in human communities. How do we flourish right now with all of that? One author calls it the full catastrophe. How do we flourish amidst the full catastrophe on the way to helping other people flourish? And I'll just end with a quote from the Catholic activist Dorothy Day. She has a pretty well-known book called The Long Loneliness. And there's a quote in there that says, "We have all known the long loneliness, and we have learned that the only solution is love, and that love comes with community." So love is not an escape from community. Love, requires community to be manifest in any meaningful way. And so we're drawn into community with all of the catastrophe that goes along with that. But if we're oriented towards the right horizon and other people are inspired by her, the leader points to the horizon and says, why don't we go in that direction? And people say, yeah, that sounds energizing. And you work together, and there's problems and there's difficulties, conflicts and things along the way. But, while you're doing that, that is flourishing, even amidst the suffering. So I guess that's where I'm landing right now when I start to reflect on people like Brian Stevenson, who've been doing this for so many decades now, and just seemingly unending source of energy. Sometimes I feel fatigued or exhausted or something, and then I, oh, he just founded a museum in addition to all the other stuff. How did that happen? It happened because, and this is, I guess, one of the most important reframings of leadership that I can recall, is that leadership is not a capacity of an individual, it's a capacity of a system. And so when you empower lots of people to act as leaders from whatever role they're in a family, it could be that the children are leading some things. Then you've got so much more energy and so much more ability to do work, to move mountains, etc. So I think that's, that's the joy, that's what's energizing, that's what's inspiring, and that's also where the suffering lies.
Absolutely. It's so human. And thank you so much for those amazing reflections. I love this idea that we got to embrace the whole person, like whether they're condemned or, just having quite an easy time of it. But actually, when we embrace the whole person, when we get absolutely on a level, see them absolutely who they are and who they can be wherever they're at the moment, and then we can really connect with them. And that then builds the community, and then we can all serve together. And as we serve together in community, then we can get some great stuff done and head towards our North Star, but also we can flourish at the same time. That's such a brilliant way of capturing it, Matt. Thank you so much. And
well, you summed it up so much more concisely than I did. So you can just take that little clip out, and that's our whole hour-long conversation right there.
No way, definitely not. Definitely not. It wouldn't make any sense without the richness of the conversation. That's brilliant. So we talked quite a lot about love last time, and I know that you're trying to create a measure of love. How's that going? Because I know that that's a big question for a lot of people, because sometimes people say if you don't measure something, it doesn't get valued. But then how do you measure a virtue like love, or, you know, a concept like love?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And, you know, I would say that sometimes we stand before the transcendent mystery, and our measures are only of second or third order significance. So, you know, love for me is one of those words that points to something that cannot be named. And so if that's the case, then our measures can only get part way at best. You know, we can't even begin to fully conceptualize love or even talk about it. How can we possibly measure it? So that doesn't mean that there's no value in measuring some glimpse of love, you know, a glimmer of love. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is, you know, first of all, recognize that there may be something essential, a core of love that might be present in all types of relationships. And we're not the first group at the Human Flourishing Program to notice this or try to explore this. This is very familiar territory for a lot of people, but you know, that's not to say that there's consensus in any discipline, social science or humanities discipline, about this. I think there's a lot of, you know, debate, and it's healthy debate. You know, we don't want to get complacent and think we've got all the answers or the only way. There's all kinds of baggage and bias and everything built into everything that human beings do. And so we just need some humility there, and we need dialogue. And so that's, you know, that's a big part of what we're trying to do. So we've had dialogue, and we plan more dialogue across many different perspectives and different disciplines, and even different religious traditions throughout the world. We're trying to see to what extent are we onto something that starts to look like it's universal across these different relationships. But we know that the love of a parent for a child is different than the love of spouses, or, you know, different than the love of enemies or the love of strangers. And so for each of these types of relationships, we're trying to come up with survey items. And it's not like survey items are the only way to go, but initially survey items that reflect something meaningful about that type of relationship, just to make it more concrete. So we've started with parents and children, and we have a series of questions getting at love from different angles for that. And we've started working on love of neighbor. And then the next one, I believe our group will work on, is love of enemy. And then we can ask the question, you know, what's common to all of these measures? And I think, you know, one thing that we're doing is to ground our conceptualization of love in some of the work of Thomas Aquinas, who argued that love, you know, there's really a couple types of love, at least. One is, you know, you want to contribute to the good of the other. You want that other person to flourish. So you're doing something to help nurture their growth, and they're doing the same for you. So it's this kind of mutuality about contributing to the good of the other. But then there's also value in being with the other, being present with the other in some way. And it doesn't mean physically present all the time. If I'm condemned on death row, you know, the best I can do is write a letter to someone, but there's a kind of connection or a kind of relationship. So we think about contributory love and unitive love as being present in most relationships, maybe not all relationships. Sometimes there won't be a unitive dimension necessarily, or it won't be a conventionally unitive. It might be a spiritual connection for someone you've never met, or, you know, something like that. But we're trying to understand, you know, what are the different dimensions of those experiences in specific types of relationships. So parents and children have a way of relating that's appropriate, and that's not appropriate in other kinds of. If you treated every single stranger that you came across as a child, you'd never make it home to deal with your own children. So, it's kind of like there's a kind of practical wisdom that's involved in discerning how to love, because, the possibilities are infinite. And so we have to make choices, and it's not choosing between a good and an evil, but choosing between competing goods. And how do we do that? What resources, cultural resources, do we have in our tradition? How can we learn from other traditions how they do it, so that if there's something we're missing or there's a blind spot in our approach, we might better understand that. So this has been our work, and I've written a few things with some others trying to connect this to leadership specifically, because I guess I wouldn't want to speak for the group. I guess what I'll say from my perspective is that the core of love should be just as evident in a leader working with other members of an organization, or even people who are outside of the organization, as it would be between parents and children, or spouses, or anyone else. It's just a question of how do you express that? What is appropriate? And there's only 24 hours in the day. So we're trying to figure out what is universal and also what is particular, if that makes any sense. But contributing to the flourishing or the good of the other, and being in relationship with the other seems really important. And we had a symposium last year with representatives from various traditions around the world, and there's no real disagreement that those two elements should be part of love. There's some other things that you find in these different traditions that enhance that. But yes, contributing to the good of the other, and desiring to be with the good that is the other, those are pretty common across traditions. So we think we have a solid foundation, and of course, it's through dialogue that we'll find where the cracks are and figure out what to do about that.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think it's such an exciting project, and I love the way that you're going in with genuine humility and trying to get, properly cross-cultural representation in it. I think that's so positive. And I love the fact that you're not saying we can classify love as, a bunch of survey items, but actually we can get part of the way there. And I think that's huge. I think that distinction just brings so much credibility and so much excitement. And I think the two things that you've landed on are so relevant to leadership, because if we're not contributing to the flourishing and the good of others as leaders, then what are we doing? Surely that's the number one purpose. And it's impossible to lead well and to have what you would consider good leadership without genuine connection. So I think that the case for love in leadership is difficult to argue against, for sure. Yeah. And the fact that you're giving us something that might be a measure may mean that it's easier for leaders to adopt, whilst completely recognizing that it is it's transcendental. So you can't tie it down to a bunch of tick boxes, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to at least capture some of the essence of it. So it sounds really, really exciting. What are you most excited? Sorry, go on.
Well, thank you for that. And I would just add that even with recognizing that these reductionist kinds of measures can't fully do justice to something like love, we can still say there's all of these measures of love already in circulation, and they predict things, at some level. We're hoping that what we come up with, informed by all of those other measures, we're not starting fresh, but we're learning from other measures, that we're hoping that our measures will be even more predictive of desired outcomes, like physical health and emotional well-being and all the rest. So if we have a measure of parent and child love, and it provides some guidance about what parents can do, so that later on their children will be more likely to have a flourishing life, then that would be a good outcome. And it's the same thing in organizations. If we can measure love appropriately in organizational context, then we ought to be able to help organizations become better able to accomplish their goals, more financially sustainable, and do more good in the world, because we have clarity about what love is, because there's so much confusion about love, unhealthy forms of love and health, all this stuff. And, my feeling is that if it's unhealthy, it's not love. And that doesn't mean that suffering's not part of it. When you love, you're vulnerable to suffering. So, there's healthy suffering and unhealthy suffering. So when we start to cut through some of the cultural confusion that has been layered on top of our concept of love, we might be able to create measures that are actually better able to predict outcomes for individuals, but also for organizations. And so we wouldn't say that we've captured love completely, but we have something that's practically useful. And that is, that's beneficial. And I hope that that's how this works out. That's what I'm excited about right now, is the possibility that that actually could be our contribution, and it could really help so many people.
Oh, that's magical. And yeah, that predictive potential is absolutely huge, because it's so hard for people to change behavior without actually knowing kind of what the outcome's going to be. But actually, if you can say, look, this will help the health of your co-workers, this will help the well-being of your co-workers, it's going to help our bottom line, what's not to like? Right. And here are some really practical things that you can do. In the way that your program's done with Flourishing as well, you've got some brilliant practical tools that you can use that have been really shown to, they're really likely actually to boost your flourishing. So give them a go. And if we can do the same for love, look, lead with love in these ways, and you're really likely to get these better outcomes. And I think that's hugely exciting, and yeah, such a potential contribution and gift to the world as we try and move kind of leadership for flourishing forwards.
Thank you. And I should mention that some of my colleagues have already published a paper. They called their construct parental warmth, which is commonly how it's discussed and measured. I think it's at least a partial measure of love. Yeah. And they show that young people who experienced a higher level of parental warmth earlier in life have a lot better flourishing outcomes later in life. So there already is some indication. We think that we would actually be able to predict even more if we had a more comprehensive measure of love. We're able to get a little bit closer to what love is, and not just warmth is part of it, but warmth is not the only thing. And so I think that there's a lot of possibility for applications, not just for families, but for groups of all kinds.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. That is so exciting, Matt. And yeah, wow, what a thing to be building. It's just brilliant. Really brilliant. What other research are you excited about at the moment that you're reading or writing? And
well, we've our program has just launched the Global Flourishing Study with Baylor University and Gallup and the Center for Open Science, all as collaborative partners. And so we aim to collect data relatively soon on 22 different countries, respondents in 22 different countries with nationally representative samples, and then follow the same respondents every year for 5 years. And we'll be able to see how their flourishing levels go up or down or stay the same, and what might be associated with those changes. It's a massive challenge to come up with measures that make sense in all cultures, or that mean the same thing in all cultures. So it's just enormously exciting to be part of that attempt. And I think there will be future attempts based on the foundation that we're hoping to create with this first project. And invariably, others will come along and do it better. But it's important to have that kind of baseline set of measures and data sets, and learn what we can from that, and then contribute to the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom that human beings continue to produce long after we're gone. So we're hoping that this is useful in the short run, and perhaps even in the long run.
Oh, I think it's going to be incredibly useful. I cannot wait to read it. Just literally with bated breath. And the love measures. Honestly, it's so exciting. Just brilliant. And Matt, just to kind of start to think of bringing this all together, I was just wondering, what advice would you give to someone around leadership? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, you should ask Tyler, the director of our program, or Byron, the director of the program at Baylor. They're leading the global flourishing study, so they probably would be better able to more completely answer it. I can offer just a few thoughts from my vantage point, just what I've noticed over the years. I think the most important thing is just this awareness that everyone is a leader. And everyone is leading all the time. They are influencing, they're having an effect on others. It might be a negative effect, it might be unintentional, but we are all leading all the time. And people are paying attention and people are being influenced by us. So everyone is a leader, and we can be more intentional and have more of a positive impact if we accept that reality. And so, I think about that book, Connected, by Christakis and Fowler. It's your friends' who you've never met that are influencing your behavior. And so we're influencing people we've never met, and they're influencing us and they've never met us. And so that's an awesome power. And so we think that we're powerless and, we're stuck in a social structure that's, pressing down on us. And, we have such limited sphere of control. And maybe it is true in the sense that there's, 7+ billion human beings and we're just one, but collectively we are part of something quite powerful. And we can shift groups, shift the trajectory a little bit. If the large asteroid is coming to the Earth to destroy us, we can send something very small and just knock it off its course a little fraction. And by the time it gets to us, it's, many thousands of miles off course. So I think that we can just have that understanding. It's like, I talk to a lot of people, and I don't know that everyone feels like they have that kind of power, that kind of agency to have an influence on the world. But we all have that power. We should feel empowered to nurture the growth of people close by, and to ask the question, well, what could I do on a more macro scale? And we've got role models. I go back to Brian Stevenson. You're busy trying to prevent the state from killing your client. How do you have time to, found a museum or found an initiative or, these other things? Well, it's because it's all connected. And so everything that we do can have a kind of integrity. And so if we recognize that we are already leaders, whether we want to be a leader or not, then we can either live into that sense of empowerment and do it more intentionally, or we can run away from it. And I think that, we just have to collectively as a species recognize our power and accept it, and then become responsible for it. And that's where it's, you mentioned the North Star earlier. It is helpful to have some sense that we know where we're going, like something is guiding us. And if we feel like we are aimless, then that's something to work on. And so we're aimless leaders. And that is not healthy because, there's a lot of, societies that can be understood as rudderless ships, just sort of drifting around until they collide with other societies. And, that's just not workable anymore, as we're seeing on the global scale. So we have to become more intentional about the power that we already have. And we have to recognize that we're all leaders and we're all responsible for that power. And so I would love to see more conversation about leadership as a capacity of a system, and what role does everyone play in leading the collective in the direction of a North Star. And, as you've, talked with other people as part of this series, clarifying that sense of purpose is really neglected. And I'm thinking of, your conversation with Jim Ritchie Dunham, and a lot of his work at the Institute for Strategic Clarity is about strategic clarity. Like, how do we know where we're going? Or are we all rowing the boat in different directions? And that we just can't afford that anymore. And it's actually not enjoyable. It's much more enjoyable to have clarity, to row in the same direction, even amidst the full catastrophe.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much. Oh, Matt, that's been absolutely amazing. Do you have any closing thoughts apart from like rowing in the same direction, even amongst the full catastrophe? That's just brilliant.
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you, for hosting these conversations and for inviting me to be part of it. I think collectively, there's just so much to share on this topic, and so much reframing around what leadership really is, and how it's connected to love, and how it's a joy, and it's, filled with vulnerability and suffering and all the rest. But I don't want to downplay the, many decades and sometimes centuries that have gone into creating the conflicts that we see in our world. And so it's not like, a leader can come in and wash all that away, but the skillful leader can recognize that and begin to work with a healthy set of dynamics that can begin to address that. So many of these conflicts are intractable or impossible. But I remember the title of a book that has stuck with me: The Impossible Will Take a Little While. And so, we might not solve it in a day, but we do have a sense of a North Star, and we know what some of the dynamics are that we've been blind to. And so sometimes leaders can very unintentionally do a lot of harm by not understanding the history and not understanding the current power dynamics and other things, and say things that are unhelpful in our current moment. And we have to become really good listeners to understand, what is the long history that has brought us to this moment, so that we can see the blind spots in our own perspectives and the perspectives that we've inherited, and then begin to work collaboratively with folks who have a different perspective, so that we can begin to uproot some of these really entrenched, impossible situations. But it's exciting to become part of that work. And so sometimes people say, well, that's exhausting just thinking about that. But you look at people, and again, I go back to concrete examples. Brian Stevenson, he doesn't seem exhausted. He seems energized, and he seems to energize everyone who works with him. So there are examples of what does it look like not to turn away from the challenges, as impossible as they are, because the temptation is just turn away from that. It's impossible. I'm going to do something small. But to go say, well, that's impossible, and I'm going to do something even bigger than that.
That's amazing. And I love that you say that it starts with really, really open-hearted listening, and really humble listening as well, and really trying to understand their perspectives. It's interesting, just on this current really tragic conflict, a very senior general, a military general from the British Army, was saying, actually, you just got to be careful, because at the end of any conflict, whether you are the supposed victor or the supposed loser in the conflict, you've got to have total humility, and you've got to be really, really graceful. And you've got to be graceful in victory and graceful in defeat. And exactly as you're saying, it's just being so, so careful to really deeply listen with an open heart, whatever the situation in the conflict. And I think probably the best example I've come across of that is Betty Bigombe in Uganda. So she was a very junior minister in Uganda, and she was tasked to go and speak to the Lord's Resistance Army. So she went into the jungle to find Joseph Kony as a woman, which he was exceptionally offended by, to the point of violence, which was tragic. But after a good year and a half of just listening to him non-judgmentally with an open heart, got it to the point where he would come out of the jungle and negotiate with Uganda's leadership. Now, unfortunately, situation outside her control meant that broke down. But actually, I think that lesson is just, embrace that power. This was a very junior minister in Uganda. This was a woman going to the Lord's Resistance Army, and yet she was able, through listening and an open heart, to be able to potentially turn that conflict around. So yeah, I think that's amazing.
That's an inspiring example of someone operating from a higher level of awareness.
Yeah.
And that's what, if only we could all do that, we would have a better shot at solving some of these problems. So we need to hear those kinds of stories, and whatever the outcome might be in any particular case, it's still the right thing to do. And it's still necessary to tell the story so that other people can learn, well, what is the right thing to do? And, what is our measure of success? Not whether we get some kind of written agreement or we solve some specific problem, but we did the right thing. And that we did what was required, regardless of, whatever external things might happen. We inwardly, we know we did the right thing. I think that's really marvelous.
Amazing. Matt, a million thanks. Let's end on doing the right thing as much as we possibly can and living in the state of awareness where we listen with our whole hearts and appreciate the full person, however catastrophic that is. A million thanks, Matt. That was amazing.
Thank you, Katy. Very much appreciated. Look forward to continuing this conversation.
Absolutely.